This segment you are about to listen to is a snippet from my book, A Complete Refutation of the Hadith, All Objections Considered, which is currently in the process of being written. In this work, I plan to deal with all of the popularist claims made by what is known as the Muslim world, quote unquote, for ratifying their Hadith literature as a necessary part of our faith. I aim, if God should will, to deconstruct all of the points made by the Hadith enthusiasts succinctly, clearly, and thoroughly, showing that the only valid position one can hold with respect to Islam is to follow the Quran alone, without any supplementing sources. My goal is to make this project as comprehensive as possible, hoping it becomes a standard textbook in the Quran alone tradition, which is referenced and referred to in debates and discussions about this topic. I pray that it is a blessing to you, my listener. Peace and God bless. All right, peace to you, ladies and gentlemen. How are you? So in today's video, I'm going to do a little bit of a reading from my book, which is being written. And it's an insight which I'm very thankful to God that the Most High has given it to me. And I think you guys will find it very beneficial. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the true nature of the early history of Islam, or at least the Quranic iteration of Islam, because we know Islam has existed since Adam and really even before then, because Islam just means submission and everything submits to God right away, automatically. The moment there was a creation, the moment there was a world, automatically Islam existed because it was compelled to submit to God by force. So, but what I mean is the early history of Islam, the Quranic iteration after Muhammad, and also the omission of Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim, because a lot of people, they have a messed up understanding of him, and really what was going on, the true context and the framework in which they operated. And like I said, I think you're going to find this very beneficial and insightful. So we begin the reading right now. Understanding the mission of Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim. Many Hadith enthusiasts believe in a skewed view of history, where their religion and all of its extra Quranic literature was somehow the orthodox faith since the time of Muhammad and the early Muslims. This perspective, however, arises not from an objective analysis of the facts, but rather a zealously biased tradition worship which colors the facts in the way it wishes to see them. The Arab religion does not truly understand the mission nor the context of Imam Bukhari, Imam Muslim, or any of the other most trusted compilers of the Hadith. This is the key point here. These respected Hadith collectors, like Bukhari and Muslim, did not have their minds focused primarily towards collecting good Hadith, but instead rejecting bad ones. What I mean to say is that the core foundation of their efforts was not Hadith collection and adoption, but Hadith dismissal. Although, yes, these men did compile a great number of Hadith, their primary aim was not to dogmatically promote and stand for those Hadith, as the Sunnis and Shias of today do. Truthfully, their targets were aimed at eliminating all of the falsehoods in the Hadith corpus which have been attached to the last prophet. This point may seem insignificant at first, but if we follow its tail down the road, you will see just how profound it is in shaping our view of the early history of Islam, at least the Quranic iteration of Islam. Regarding Bukhari, and quickly, I want to interject here. So, throughout my book, I'm referencing another book. It's called A Textbook of Hadith Studies by Muhammad Hashim Kamali. This man is seen by far as one of the, if not the most authoritative scholar of Hadith and Islamic, really Sunni jurisprudence in the world. So I'm referencing his book to study the best of my opponent's position and to really encapsulate and understand what he believes, okay? This guy is a staunch Hadithan. He's been studying Hadith and Islamic fiqh, or, jurisprudence and law for like over 30 years. He's been teaching in the University of Malaysia. This man, there's nobody more authoritative than him, okay? So he is a very fair and accurate representation of the Sunni Hadith and overall paradigm. So we read from, regarding Bukhari, Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim's process of filtering through the messy Hadith library. We read from Professor Kamili. So this is his book, A Textbook of Hadith Studies, page 33. Muhammad bin Ismail al-Bukhari, 194 to 256, traveled widely and devoted 16 years to the compilation of Sahih al-Bukhari, which has remained to this day the most authoritative of all collections. Al-Bukhari interviewed over 1,000 hadith transmitters or sheikhs in the Hijaz, Egypt, Nishapur, and Mur in Iraq, and allegedly collected a vast number of 600,000 ahadith, from which he then selected 9,082 ahadith. He has repeated ahadith which had more than one chain of isnad, as the strength and reliability of the isnad is deemed to increase with the plurality of transmission. When such repetitions are taken into account, the original figure of 600,000 is also likely to be drastically reduced. And again, in a textbook of Hadith studies, page 36, Muslim, so now Sahih Muslim bin al-Hajjaj al-Nisaburi, 206 to 261, compiled his Sahih Muslim, which contains 10,000 ahadith, 3,030 repetitions, derived from a larger mass of about 300,000 ahadith. Muslim was in many ways a follower of al-Bukhari, which he has acknowledged himself and has to a large extent also utilized al-Bukhari's methods. When al-Bukhari came to Nishapur, then one of the finest cities of Khurasan, Muslim kept him company and he held al-Bukhari in affection and esteem. Muslim also learned from al-Bukhari's teacher, Ishaq bin Rahaweh, who was one of the leading scholars of Khurasan. Now I'm continuing my portion of the book, my reading and commentary. Many of the more studied Sunnis, and by the way, quickly to interject again, I want you to focus in on the number of hadith they collected and then the number of hadith which they ended up going with, which they determined as sahih or the most reliable. So we have with Bukhari 600,000, which was eventually boiled down to 9,082, and then Muslim we have 300,000, which was eventually boiled down to just 10,000. So many of the more studied Sunnis, when confronted with criticisms against their hadith, will relay to us how stringent Bukhari and Muslim's hadith collection process was. The intelligentsia of the Sunni religion do this to add credibility to their literature outside of the Quran, by giving us the impression that it was built upon extreme methodological prudence, and thereby it is trustworthy. I have heard from many others, not just Professor Kamili, about the vast number of hadiths that were thrown out by these men in an attempt to only keep the narrations that are truly historical. Imam Bukhari had an original tram of a whopping 600,000 hadiths, from which he teased out 9,082, which he felt had the strongest historicity. And Imam Muslim contended with his own staggering number of 300,000 hadiths that he ended up boiling down to a mere 10,000 traditions. From the total available body of hadiths, that is only 1.5% and 3.3% of the accounts of the Prophet that were actually accepted by Bukhari and Muslim respectively. The adherents of the Arab religion relay this fact to us to increase our confidence in their collection of hadiths due to the stringency of their requirements. But if you think about it closely and carefully, these numbers should not give you more trust in their oral tradition, but instead further impugn their reliability. When the Hadithan tells us of the rigorous standards for a narration to make it into the library of Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, instead of adding sanctity to his Hadith, it really just gives further justification to follow the Quran alone, by revealing to us some hidden gems about the early history of their deviant religion. Allow me to unpack. As stated before, Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim made it their mission not to canonize hadiths, which according to even their own numbers was a cripplingly small minority, but really to reject the lion's share of bad ones. These men were chiefly stationed with the task of weeding out the many accretions that were fraudulently attached to the Prophet Muhammad's name. Hence why both of their combined final output of quote-unquote quality hadiths was less than even 5% of the total body of traditions available to them at the time. So remember, 600,000 eventually turns to 9,000 for Bukhari, and then 300,000 turned to 10,000 for Muslim. Anything which they even felt was slightly doubtful, they threw out. What does all of this mean, then? It means, this is the point here I want you to focus on, it means that these legendary collectors of hadith, Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim, were primarily hadith rejectors. The spirit in which they approached their work was a spirit of hadith spurning and hadith skepticism, not hadith promotion, hadith dogmatism, and hadith worship as the adherents of the Arab religion today embody. This insight is colossal in nature and critical for you to understand in order to know where the incredible dissolution of quote-unquote Islam, really the Arab religion, began. Okay, I talk about this in a previous, this is an interjection. I talk about this in a previous part of the book where, this was the problem, and this is admitted by Professor Kamili. He's once again a completely highly authoritative in their, worldview, the Sunni Hadithan worldview. This guy is the foremost expert. He admits that since the beginning there were many, many, many false hadiths being ascribed to Muhammad, and that's why Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim, this is what they were laboring against. This is what they were trying to clean up. Okay, so keep that in mind as I continue the reading. So this has always been since the beginning, always been the problem since after the messenger died. All these hadiths that were spreading around about him, all these false sayings and narrations. So continuing with the reading. False hadiths have always been the big issue within the early body of believers. After the impactful and legendary man Muhammad died and returned back to his creator, many people started to say many things about him, most of which were completely fabricated. These aberrant word-of-mouth traditions circulated around the ummah, or community, and wicked men started to attach their own heretical doctrines to the name of Muhammad to give their cults and strange practices credibility. And again, I have this quoted throughout the book. Kamili admits this, that people were trying to attach things to the name of Muhammad, saying that Muhammad said such and such hadith for their own motivations. So, continuing. Many devious individuals began to, as it were, teach their alien creeds through the lips of Muhammad by pinning their narratives to him. This prevalent epidemic of corrupt narrations that circulated around the believers was the environment which Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim found themselves in. It was these very distortions which they intensely warred against. In reiterating the point above, the fundamental character of their movement was that of hadith rejection. I, as a Quran alone believer, am just, this is the point, this is the, my Sunday punch right here. I, as a Quran alone believer, am just following that same tradition of hadith skepticism which they, Bukhari and Muslim, possessed, and taking it to its logical conclusion, which is the rejection of all hadith. I am merely allowing what is a natural progression to go one step further by throwing them all out. Only then can we alleviate the honorable man Muhammad of all of the junk which has been superglued to his name from the beginning by the various devils who felt they benefited from doing so. Us Quran alone Muslims are really pay attention. Us Quran alone Muslims are really completing the work of Bukhari and Muslim by discarding everything that is doubtful, which truthfully is the whole hadith enterprise. Bukhari rejected over 97% of hadiths. Muslim rejected over 95% of hadiths. The Sunnis reject the Shias' hadiths. The Shias reject the Sunnis' hadith. All of them are, to a greater or lesser extent, more so greater, hadith rejectors. The Quran alone Muslims look at all of this pandemonium madness and say, enough is enough, dispensing with all of this superfluous clutter which has clogged the mental pipes of the Arab religion for centuries. We read from Professor Kamili about the inspiration behind Imam Bukhari's work. So again, we read in a textbook of Hadith Studies, page 35. Al-Bukhari has explained how he is inspired to undertake the writing of a Sahih al-Bukhari when he noted that he was in the... So this is explaining what was the thing that led Bukhari to do what he did. When he noted that he was in the company of his teacher Ishaq bin Rahaweh, together with some of his other disciples, where he mentioned in passing, if you were to compile a compendium, kitaban mukhtasaran, of the authentic sunnah, li sahih al-sunnah, of the messenger of God, peace be upon him. Al-Bukhari says that the idea occurred to him then, and his inspiration became stronger where this is the point here, he dreamt one night he stood in front of the Prophet and Al-Bukhari had a fan in his hand. This he understood to mean that he was blessed with the task of removing doubts and impurity from the Sunnah of the Prophet. So this was the inspiration for Al-Bukhari. Imam Bukhari, he had this dream where he was standing in front of the Prophet, fanning him, and this was symbolically removing all of the falsehoods that were attached to him. This is massive and significant. Continuing with my commentary. This is prima facie evidence that the spirit of these men, Bukhari and Muslim, was hadith rejection. Bukhari felt moved to form his collection after a dream he had where he was standing in front of the Prophet fanning him, which symbolically represented blowing away all of the lies that people affixed to him for their own personal agendas. I today, as a staunch, uncompromising Quran alone Muslim, pick up that same fan where he left off, this time using it to completely waft off all of the fables welded to Muhammad's name via a total repudiation of the Hadith corpus, a task which Bukhari sadly fell short of. His work would only have been complete if those 9,082 narrations he kept were boiled down even further to zero, a task which the Quran alone community has picked up the gauntlet for. But just because I am drawing parallels between Bukhari and Muslim and the Quran alone tradition of which I am a part, namely the parallel of us both carrying the spirit of Hadith rejection, that does not mean I don't think these men made mistakes. On the contrary, I see quite plainly that some of these really most fervent rejectors of Hadith, Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim, made grave, even fatal blunders in their work, which would set the so-called Muslim people on a crash course trajectory to utter disaster, although those two may not have been aware of that inevitable consequence. The foundational flaw within so Bukhari and Muslim's mission was this: not regarding the Quran as a complete and clear instruction book on all matters pertaining to our faith. As much as the Arab religion will try to cope by crafting sophisms against the following point, their rhetorical devices hold no water in the end. That point can be stated as such, that if you really, truly believe the Quran is complete, clear, perfect, and easy to understand, and that God alone is sufficient as its explainer, then you will never feel compelled or drawn to bring in extra sources to inform your life as a believer. That right there is a motif I will emphasize throughout this book, which is that whether people realize it or not, or accept it or not, feeling the unexplained urge to find extra sources of doctrinal guidance in your life is based on the presupposition that the Quran and God who reveals it, explains it, is not sufficient. This criticism applies to anybody who refers to the Hadith literature for religious enumeration, and it follows suit as well for Bukhari and Muslim, who sadly did just that. I personally believe that the Quran and its all-knowing explainer, God the Most High, is enough. That is why, aside from the Quran, I do not defect towards any other well in order to drink the waters of guidance. However, if you do not believe that the Quran and God who clarifies it is adequate, then you will very well need the Hadith as well as a board of scholars, imams, muftis, and other intermediaries to undertake that labor and make things clear for you. This is the heart of the error of Bukhari and Muslim. They transgress the bounds by seeking out other sources of infallible truth outside of the Quran, and this daring investigation of theirs would cripple their people for over 1,000 years to come, the mistake stumbling even into the 21st century today. Remember, my honored reader, that in the beginning, after the completion of the Prophet Muhammad's divine appointment and his returning back to God, the only dogmatic written text which people possessed to base their lives on was the Holy Quran. When the messenger ceased, that is what he, and most importantly God, left for the world. So the Quran, that was all that was there. There was no Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, or any other codified documentation outside of this immaculate Quran. This is another key point. The milieu, so this zeitgeist, this worldview which exists now of upholding two, if not more sources as the basis of our faith, is a later invention. All the people had back then was the Quran. The Hadiths, as a formalized and canonized item of religious significance, did not exist. So remember, all this stuff was just scattered around, oral traditions. It didn't exist like it does now. It was later, hundreds of years later, compiled by Bukhari and Muslim and other men. Okay, so at that time, all there was the Quran. All the Hadith was scattered and fragmented oral traditions from a multitude of sources. That is it. For the first few hundred years, the Hadiths were merely amorphous Chinese whispers swimming around the believing body, not a dogmatized, beatified document for religious matters. From this, we automatically know that this Hadithan zeitgeist of peddling not one, but two standard texts, the Quran and the Sahih Hadith, is a subsequent contrivance foreign to the original paradigm founded by Muhammad. That, my reader, is the true early history of Islam. It began with the Quran alone and then found itself being tested by a heap of accretions that started to spread, and since then it has been a toilsome task to rid our faith of said accretions, which many of the earliest scholars, including Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim, labored under, but they did not go all the way. This was the greatest trial for our faith since its earliest inception, and only few people, the Quran alone believers, have passed it. We see from all of the preceding that the Quran alone was the original holy tradition, the original way, and that this hadith swirling circus show is the new strange cult which emerged and eventually took over. That usurping circus show has lived on until today and is the Arab religion, which calls itself Islam. So that's a little quick portion I want to read for you. I want to put everything in the right framework and mindset. So the Quran alone was the original tradition, and all these scholars that they uphold, these supposedly pro-hadith scholars and stuff like that, like they're so pro-hadith today, these Sunnis and Shias, remember that the original compilers, they were operating on a spirit of hadith rejection and skepticism, okay? This has always been the problem since the beginning, and all we, Quran alone, Quraniyun believers, we're just completing that tradition and throwing out everything that is doubtful. That is a very key and powerful point for you to keep in mind. So anyways, that's all I have to say on the matter. I hope this reading was a blessing to you. And yeah, peace and God bless to you, ladies and gentlemen. Take care. Peace and blessings in the name of the Most High, viewer. My name is Walid Naeem, and I am a zealous submitter to the one true God, the creator of all mankind. Do you notice something wrong with the world? Something strange? Despite us having a church, synagogue, and mosque in every neighborhood, how has this entire Western civilization fallen into abject atheism, nihilism, and savagery? Why does life just seem so dull, so meaningless, and so devoid of anything real in the Occidental world? Despite the ubiquitous presence of these religious institutions, why are our so-called Muslim sons in large numbers drinking, smoking, partying, and chasing after women, with no seeming desire to do anything more with their life other than satisfy their base pleasures, when God has commanded them to be clean, righteous, and responsible leaders of their community? And why are our hijabi so-called Muslim daughters walking around with tight jeans that reveal their figure, with TikTok accounts posting semi-provocative, self-absorbed videos of themselves online for the world to see, when God has commanded them to lengthen their garments and be modest in their mannerisms? What has happened here? These young men and women are supposed to be making themselves right before God, while raising the next generation of ardent defenders of the holy faith. But it seems that Islam features no more in their lives other than a scarf on their head, a Friday fidgeting around in the mosque when their parents force them to go against their will, or a decorative hanger in their car. At this rate, if God allows us to continue going down the road it is, then Islam and the Quran will become pretty much non-existent in the lives of most of our descendants, if it wasn't already non-existent now. If we do not take a stand soon, in a few generations, our children's children will likely be indistinguishable from the secular West. Is that the kind of world we want to live in? Our kids to live in? A world practically devoid of the remembrance of the one God and all things sane? I obviously can't speak for you, but for my own self, I can personally say, count me out of it. I'm not going to sit here and just watch my brothers and sisters, those who claim to believe in God alone, believe in Judgment Day, His prophets and angels, and all the other aspects of this holy creed, get duped into going to hell. I'm not going to let this happen without at least something of an effort on my end to reroute this dark trajectory. So, again, how in the world do we end up here? There is a mosque in practically every neighborhood in the West, and no shortage of donations that get dropped in their boxes. They have had lots of funding, lots of time, and unquestioning support from their respective congregations, yet somehow have been run over by the secular atheist. All of their so-called Muslim children go to the atheist, secular public schools for most of their week to be taught beliefs that are completely incompatible with the Quran. And we wonder why they have ended up the way they are. If these houses, and by these houses I mean the mosques, were truly of God, that were doing everything right, then why would our Lord let them get so decisively trampled upon by their enemies? Why do the wicked have all of the reins of power here? Clearly, something is not adding up. Well, it is my thesis here today that the vast, vast majority of mosques that exist in this world today have lost their way and follow a religion which is completely foreign to the Quran. This is why they have failed so miserably in the West, and it seems that God has forgotten them. In truth, the real reason behind their shortcoming is that they, and many of us, have forgotten God Himself, which is why He has left us here collecting our bitter receipts. So, what are my exact criticisms of the mosques today? As a Muslim and a man committed to the truth above all else, what are my personal gripes with their institution, which claims to be for God? The first glaring problem I can think of is that the majority of people who call themselves Muslim have allied themselves with a body of literature that is foreign to the Word of God, treating it equal to, and in fact above, the Quran itself. Of course, I am talking about the Hadith. Listen, the facts are this. There is no justification within the Quran which tells us to follow this Hadith stuff, which came hundreds of years after the Prophet Muhammad died, and therefore he could have had no ability to oversee what people have said about him and determine if it is true or false. It is now becoming crystal clear, especially in the last 10 to 20 years, that many things that have been ascribed to him in their most quote-unquote authoritative texts, which they call their Sahih Hadiths, are forgeries that directly contradict God's final revelation. To take these words of men, i.e. the Hadith, and hold them to be equally authoritative to the words of God would be breaking the first and most important commandment, which is to worship God alone, making no equals with him. To say that these supposed words of Muhammad, which are not even Muhammad's own words, but simply very doubtful rumors about what people who existed hundreds of years after him say he said, that have been decided upon by the scholars as authoritative holds equal, or in fact any weight in our faith comparable to the verbatim words of God himself, the Holy Quran, is idolatry. You are exalting man's words to the status of divinity, which should only be given to God's words. Nothing comes even close to the Quran, because God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, is its author. This includes the Hadith too, which pales in comparison and is superfluous to the glorious Quran. If you are interested in seeing a full refutation of the Hadith, you may watch my video titled A Defense of Prophet Muhammad, David Wood and Hadith Exposed, which is linked below. In it, along with refuting and putting in his place the worst opponent of Islam on the internet, Mr. David Wood, I also expose how the Hadith is completely contradictory to the Quran and the source of much of the Muslim world's problems. It is a 2-hour-long documentary where I seek to demonstrate the true character of Muhammad in the Quran, defending his history and personality with primary source quotations. I clear the last prophet of God's name from the people who have tarnished his reputation the most, which are certain types of Christians, and, sad to say, Hadith-following Muslims, which have said many terrible things about him. No, Muhammad was not a money-hungry, tyrannical warlord who married a 6-year-old girl. He was a shy, humble, meek man who married adult women, had compassion for even his worst enemies, and oftentimes had a tough time even standing up for himself out of fear of hurting other people's feelings. This is all demonstrated in detail in my video. Once again, the link for that will be in the description under the tab, The True Character of Muhammad in the Quran. So that is the first problem with the mosques, the reason for which I feel they have been forsaken by God, their adoption of an apostate literature which contradicts their foundational scripture. The second point of contention I have with many of the mosques is their seeming unwillingness to say anything controversial which may make them face persecution from their government. The fact that 9/11 was not only an inside job, but the fact that no planes hit the Twin Towers on that day, and the whole charade was a hoax designed by the governments of the world to forever frame the Muslim people as terrorists and justify invasions in our countries, should be taught to every man, woman, and child. This great fraud of the September attacks has left such a lasting, enduring reputation on every brown person, and Muslim in general, that it should be discussed in every mosque. Our people are not responsible for that crime, but it was the governments of the world who carried out that plot and framed us for it. 9/11 is just only one small example, though. There are many, many other quote-unquote conspiracy theories, which are really just conspiracy facts, avoided by the mosques due to their controversy, like the fact that the monetary system in the West is an ungodly scam based on usury, the fact that the so-called healthcare system is a predatory empire which doesn't try to cure anybody, but instead makes money off of human suffering, the fact that sodomite propaganda is being promoted to the masses, including our children, and the fact that the thing which I will call the C-19er, to avoid censorship, was a hoax perpetrated by the powers that be to greatly expand their police state, censorship incentives, and surveillance systems worldwide in order to create their new world order, and much more. These governments that have occupied our lands are de facto terrorist regimes, and the mosques seem to say nothing of it. They appear to be more concerned with not being labeled extremists while they live their comfortable, well-funded lives, avoiding topics that are hard to deal with due to the abject persecution they bring. That is my second problem with them. Their, at the very least, lack of awareness, or if not, perhaps lack of willingness to address the real geopolitical situation going on in the world. And lastly, my third trouble with the mainstream mosques, which can also be put into the category of conspiracy facts, is their complete ignorance on the true nature of the earth. It may sound as a shock to you, my viewer, that the Quran, the Bible, and in fact all of the ancient scriptures teach the earth is flat and stationary. This is the only model of the world which is compatible with those texts and also scientifically provable. This flat earth conspiracy, which should really be called the globe earth conspiracy, is one of the biggest lies of the modern world, we are told, and goes in line with what I said earlier about the endemic corruption of the governments of the world. Everything you have been told about where you live is a fabrication, and the space agencies are a shameless hoax. For a fully detailed presentation on the subject of flat earth, where I demonstrate the science, the history, the philosophy, the verses in the Bible and Quran proving it, and much more, you can read my book titled The Flat Earth Manifesto, which is linked in the description. This work runs to nearly 1,200 pages and is practically a textbook on not only the topic of flat earth, but the subject of physics proper, and I expose the biggest fraudulent religion of the West, which is science worship, otherwise known as scientism. As with all of my work, it too is available for free. No, you do not live on a pathetic speck of dust spinning around in the middle of nowhere in space. You live in a brilliant, intelligently designed terrarium created by God and are at the center of the universe. Again, to learn more, the link to the Flat Earth Manifesto will be in the description. Those right there are my 3 biggest scores against the mosques of today. There are more points I could bring up, but these are the major ones. These are the controversies which have estranged me from the rest of the so-called Muslim world. Believe me when I say that I would love to join them, and that it hurts me so deeply that I have to pit myself up against the very institution I was born and raised in, the mosques I attended from childhood, whose carpets upon which I walked, stood, prayed, and listened to the preaching in my earliest years. But that is the price to pay for the truth. My commitment to God and what is right is more important than my emotional attachments to a place that was once dear to my heart. Simply put, this is why I think God has forsaken us. This is why I think that the mosques have been steamrolled by the secular atheist. It is because most of us have abandoned the word of God, neglected preaching the truth, and instead chosen comfort over courageous action. That is my thesis to why this great falling away in the West has taken place. If this sounds shocking to you, if it sounds so unbelievable that the majority of the so-called Muslim world could be deceived so badly, then I simply have these verses in the Quran to show you. In the name of God, the Almighty and the Merciful. Chapter 6, verse 116. And if thou obey most of those upon the earth, they will lead thee astray from the path of God. They follow only assumption, and they are only guessing. Chapter 25, verse 30. And the messenger will say, O my Lord, my people took this Quran as a thing abandoned. God has really predicted this a millennia ago. He knew that the people who follow what is really right are few and far between, that the majority of men and women are led astray, and the people who claim to love Muhammad the most, i.e. mainstream Muslims, would abandon the glorious Quran. God has revealed to us 1,000 years ago that this all would be the case. It is my mission, therefore, by the will of God, to band together with like-minded believers who have understood the truth and work together to build a new institution from the ground up, founded upon prudent fear. We need to start fresh, start anew. We need to build a new mosque where people can hear the unfiltered preaching from the Quran alone, where men and women can get married, where children can play and be educated in the truth, and where the name of the Most High God, without any associate partners, can be remembered. We need a group of highly dedicated men who will raise and defend this institution with their own hands if need be, and go out into the world warning people of the punishment of God, bearing witness to the truth of his oneness. That is my mission, my viewer. If you found that this mission of mine has touched your heart and is something you want to get involved with, then feel free to contact me in the email below. I am located in Ontario, Canada, and I'm looking forward to form a community with like-minded believers who want to contribute to this great cause. I am neither a nationalist nor racially biased. If you follow the Quran alone and believe in the truth, then as far as I'm concerned, you are my brother in the faith. I prefer you over someone of my own kindred who denies God and commits corruption in the earth. My loyalties are primarily ideological, not racial. Remember, my viewer, that this life is short, Everything we do and don't do is recorded by God and will either bear witness for us or against us on the day of judgment. Hell is eternal, and I do not know about you, but as for me, I want to meet my Creator in the best state possible. I want to spend my life struggling to build up my people, the true Muslims, so that God may be pleased with me on that day. If you are interested in that, then feel free to join me. If not, then find something else good to do which will prepare you for your appointment with the Most High. That is where we are all going anyway. With that being said, I say peace and God bless to all of you good people. Take care, everyone.